All right, everyone. Welcome in. Welcome in. It's fantastic to have you all here. I think we're going to go ahead and begin with our intro, and I'll get us started. It's lovely to have you all here, and welcome to the 2025 Consumer Impact Report pre-release webinar. If this is your very first time hearing about reading the CIR, it goes beyond the basic financial implications of identity theft, fraud, and scams, and explores the emotional and physical impacts as well as lost opportunities often experienced by victims resulting from the crimes. Leading our discussion today is Eva Velasquez, the ITRC's CEO and fearless leader. If you have any questions, please hold them to the end, but also remember you are more than welcome to send those questions in via email. I'll make sure to remind you of the email address at the end. Also, all of the slides and the recording of this webinar will all be sent out to you within the next 24 hours. So, without any further ado, our CEO, Eva.
Thanks, Tim. And I don't know about fearless, but I am the leader, and I'm here today to share a sneak peek at the highlights from our 2025 Consumer Impact Report. And thanks, everybody, for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. For those of you who don't know, we are a nonprofit 501c3 charity organization. We've been around for a long time, and we help educate consumers, small businesses, thought leaders on how to protect their personal information. We conduct research to inform the public and business leaders on the latest trends and impacts of identity-related issues. And we are the only national organization that helps victims of identity crimes recover their identities at no cost to them. We are able to provide these free services through the support of sponsors, donors, grants, and this year's report is sponsored by Experian. A big thank you to Abigail Lovell, who also serves on our board of directors, and to all the folks at Experian, who I thank them for their support of our mission and help make this possible. A little bit of housekeeping, a little background on the report. We have been doing this for a long time, 22 years, and we ask victims that we assisted in the previous year about their experience. And we go much deeper than how much time did you spend and how much money did you lose. There are a lot of reports out there that cover that topic. We certainly do ask that, but we ask so much more. And 5 years ago, we started asking that same set of questions to the general public. So now we can compare the responses of those two populations. And of course, the full methodology is listed in the report. Let's talk about these four key findings. We're definitely seeing more severe financial and emotional impacts than in years past. We have seen things incrementally creeping up, but there were some big jumps this year that we want to cover. We're seeing repeat attacks increasing. We're seeing victims, boy, they're struggling to implement that actionable advice to protect themselves. And then, of course, we're going to talk about AI at the very end of this report. So the unique attribute of the Consumer Impact Report is that we do that deep dive into the emotional, the physical, the behavior changes, just the long-term impact that identity crimes have on people's lives. I think sometimes it's hard for us to wrap our head around the fact that this crime type can be just as impactful as experiencing some violent crimes. But these emotional impacts, they're increasing across the board. And I'm going to include a few quotes here throughout this presentation so that you can see these are people in their own words telling us what they're experiencing. For this one, I'm to the point that I don't care anymore about myself or really anybody. You have to understand that I've been dealing with this problem for 10 years. For some people, particularly those with a persistent thief, which is, sometimes it's a family member, maybe a caregiver, they liken this experience to a medical condition. Victimization, it more goes into remission than is actually outright cured. That's how they experience it. Now, these are just a few of the responses. And you can see these are really strong emotions: feeling violated, feeling vulnerable. And you see the difference between general consumers and ITRC victims. Some of those emotions tend to be a lot higher. We think that's because the ITRC victims often experience more complex cases, and that's why they've reached out to us for help. But there's also the physical problems, experiencing, panic or anxiety, nervousness and stress. The sleep problems have really always been one that at least half of the population um, uh, says they're experiencing, whether that's the ITRC victims or the general consumers. But the one for me that we have to spend a lot more time talking about is considering self-harm. We've been asking this question since the inception of this report, and historically that number has been around 2 to 5%, which is still too high. But over the last couple of years, particularly during the pandemic, we really saw this number shoot up into double digits. Now we're seeing that with the general consumer population that's self-reported as a victim, 67.8% reported feelings of self-harm. I think there's a couple of reasons that may explain this. One is we changed the methodology. In previous years, we included this on a pick list. So we have a range of emotions and feelings, and people go down and check on the pick list. For this report, we actually pulled that question out and made it a standalone question. And I wonder if creating the space for people to truly reflect on that feeling allowed them to just to acknowledge it. And that's why, especially with the general consumers, why we're seeing a number that's that high. And I also wonder if this is a sign of just the additional uncertainty in the world. We're coming off the pandemic. We had this tiniest breather where maybe we felt we had our sea legs. And now there's just a lot of economic uncertainty, just uncertainty in general. And I think those could all be contributing factors to why identity crimes are so disruptive and cause this kind of feeling. Causing someone to feel like ending their life is an option, their only option to resolve this issue. And we'll dig in a little bit more to what some of those experiences are that will hopefully give you an understanding of why somebody could feel like self-harm was an option. Here's another victim quote. I lost my job, my home, my car because someone was using my identity, and I'm unable to get assistance because that person is getting assistance in my name. I think this is very telling because even when people start on the road to recovery and they are experiencing these things, we do have, in some cases, processes in place to provide assistance and financial assistance benefits to people. But for this particular victim, they couldn't even avail themselves of those benefits because a thief had gotten there first. It's kind of no wonder that they have such a range of strong emotions when they're going through this experience. And we did see losses reported to the ITRC increase in every band. And those really big losses, the six-figure and even the seven-figure losses, look, they always take my breath away. I'm sure you're having the same reaction. And it is a small percentage of the general population, a small but not insignificant number of ITRC victims. But what I also don't want us what I don't want to get lost here is that these losses are relative. We have to remember that the impact of a financial loss is directly related to what resources the person had, financial resources a person had before they became a victim. So that $5,000 loss, when you compare it to $1 million loss, you may think, oh, well, that's no big deal. But for that person, that could be life altering. It could be the difference between keeping a roof over their head and their family's head and the lights on and food on the table. So while we look at these losses and they are staggering and devastating, we also have to remember that they're relative. Now let's talk about repeat attacks. There are so many vulnerabilities when it comes to our identities, and we see victims and consumers alike struggling to implement the advice that we give them and the advice that's out there. And when I look at a quote like this, my mail is going everywhere but into my mailbox. I've lived at the same address for 30 years now. It makes me wonder, is this less of an issue of either apathy or fatigue, or more of an issue of not being able to keep pace up with the thieves? And the thieves are uh, have this ability to discover how to leverage existing and new vulnerabilities at a much faster clip than we can keep up with. And people often report, like this victim did, that they will take an action and think it's done and think they have shored that up, only to have the thief undo that action. So now the thief can exploit that vulnerability again, and the consumer, the victim, doesn't know that it's been undone until it's been exploited again. And the victim ends up having to take the same step multiple times just because of the way our systems are designed. A little more on the repeat attacks. The number of ITRC victims experiencing that single incident, look, it stayed flat over the last 2 years. And we're seeing some shifts in, is it two times or three times or four times in those multiple instances, but it's still a third of more than a third of ITRC victims are dealing with these repeat attacks, multiple incidents in a single 12-month period. Now, it's a different story for the general population. We're seeing significant growth across all of the multiple repeat attack sectors. The only decline being in the single um, incident response. We're seeing that go down, but 71% of general consumers are saying, I have experienced this multiple times in this 12-month period. There's a couple reasons. I want to break down why we're seeing such a dramatic difference with ITRC victims versus the general population. This person, I'm stuck, I'm overwhelmed on how to start over without wiping out everything I need as proof. In They're saying they're overwhelmed, and I'm sure that's true, but it looks to me more like it's paralyzed. This is someone who feels like if they make a mistake when they take an action or a step to protect themselves, are they going to cause more harm to themselves in the future? So they get caught in this loop of wanting to act and wanting to take that action, but not knowing what to do, what the consequences of that action would be in their overall recovery. And I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but with the general population, these are people who are navigating their recovery largely on their own. So I do think that direct one-on-one assistance, it does help with empowering people to feel less stuck, take that self-protective action, and not be stuck in this paralysis loop. And also they have a place to go to directly ask the questions and say, well, if I do this, then how do I preserve the proof of what happened to me? And how important is that to preserve? And just all of those questions that go along with the recovery. And it helps to kind of get out of that inertia. And, well, I can take that step and I'm not going to create more consequences for myself in the future. So we're seeing a decline, particularly around with the general population and in all of these cyber hygiene types of activities. And the question I keep asking myself, is it overwhelm? Is it fatigue? There's so many other things going on in people's day-to-day lives. Is it that they feel like they just don't have the bandwidth to keep up? Or is it a case of financial instability? A lot of these services that take some of the legwork out of it for people, they have a cost associated with them. And in times of economic uncertainty, are people feeling like I have to cut back on that? So now I have to do everything myself. I can't even get that the support, that little bit of help that some of these paid services, like a paid password manager. Um, I just think we need to consider why all of these things are happening now so that we can get together as all stakeholders can get together and figure out what is our role in helping to break through some of this lack of action, this inertia. But I certainly don't want to sound like I'm blaming victims and consumers because I'm not. It is overwhelming and confusing. So let's talk about some of the most common attacks that we heard about. A lot of folks are losing control over their online accounts, and that can make recovery a lot more difficult. If you consider we've made this push to move more and more things to digital only interactions. So we've reduced a lot of those digital off ramps. And while something like this, they changed all my passwords and emptied my bank account, your first reaction to that may be, well, I guess you'll just have to go into a branch. And that may be the solution for this person, but we have to remember that not everybody has the same level of access and the same ease of access. That's easy for people who've always had it easy. But if we consider seniors who maybe don't have reliable transportation, have to take public transportation, you think about maybe a member of the blind, low vision community, they can't just hop in their car and drive. They've got to figure out a way, maybe get assistance from someone else just to get to the bank. Maybe they don't even normally go into a branch. So they have to figure that out. It's just all these extra little steps that make recovery a little bit more cumbersome, a little bit harder. And people have to find a workaround, especially when their digital accounts are no longer under their control. For the general population, the most reported type of misuse is still social media account takeover, and it increased by 6 percentage points. I've said this before, again, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, but it bears repeating. So easy to dismiss this as not a big deal. And we reflexively go, okay, so you can't wish your Facebook friend a happy birthday, or you can't watch funny cat videos on TikTok, but it is a lot more than that. I mean, think about all we do on social media. People, they purchase goods, they donate to charities, they engage in fundraisers, help friends in need. Small business owners will often use these accounts for customer recruiting and retention. And for some of them, it's their only tool that they use. So when they lose access to that tool, it has a huge downstream effect. And there's so much more on this. I won't go into it in this webinar, but we've talked a lot about the serious impacts of social media account takeover. Now, for ITRC victims, last year the number one complaint was new loans or credit cards opened in the victim's name, and that did decrease by 8 percentage points. Now I encourage you to read the full report because we do a much deeper dive into all of the responses regarding the impacts and the attack vectors. And as I said in the introduction, look, no report is complete without talking about AI. Now, every year we have a special section where we ask a couple of questions about emerging trends or issues, the things that we are seeing out there in the world that are top of everyone's mind. So, of course, this year it has to be AI, and it is on everyone's mind, as evidenced by the fact that, look, the general population and ITRC victims are in strong agreement that this is a big deal, and they are very, very concerned about that how AI can be used to commit identity theft, fraud, and scams, and that it's important that we acknowledge this concern. And it's not really surprising. It's all over the news. I think it is hard for people to determine what the true risk is of this threat, and not just people who aren't in the space. It's hard for those of us in this space who are doing this every day to really look at the true risk of this threat. As much as we talk about it, I don't think it's overblown. I think we're just scratching the surface. I think it's going to be even more significant than we anticipate. And apparently, as I said, consumers and ITRC victims are in agreement there. But this is where they diverge, and this is really interesting. General consumers, when they're thinking about responsibility for protecting us, they had a much more siloed approach. They felt like a single sector should hold that primary responsibility for protecting the public. Whereas the ITRC victims overwhelmingly chose this more holistic approach. They opted for this shared responsibility. Couple of reasons that could be is it because these folks are further on their recovery journey, so they've had more experience with interacting with a number of different entities in order to resolve a single issue. So that experience is allowing them to see how interconnected and intertwined this whole ecosystem is. We're going to spend some time asking ourselves these questions because it is also our opinion that it is a mix of the above, and we need to take a holistic approach to the protecting people, and the responsibility to protect people is really on all of us. As I said before, the full report is going to be available on our website at idtheftcenter.org. I encourage you, please read it, share it. And of course, if you have thoughts or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you again to Experian for their support of our mission and for their support of this report. We wouldn't be able to do what we do without the engagement from our sponsors, donors, board of directors. And if you want to learn more about the ITRC and engage with us, Tim is going to share our contact information. I would definitely love to hear from you. So thank you everyone for taking the time, and that concludes our webinar.
Thank you so much, everyone. As Eva said, if you happen to have any questions, you can email communications@idtheftcenter.org. That's communications@idtheftcenter.org. And we'll make sure that your question gets answered by the right folks. I know we had a couple of questions in the Q&A, and we'll be sure to answer those via email. And like Eva said, we'll be sending out the slides and this recording very shortly to all of you. So one more time, I just want to say thank you so much for spending time with us, and we'll see you next time.